It was a bright Monday morning, the kind that makes people feel hopeful about new beginnings. Angela Davis woke up early, just like she always did. She looked at herself in the mirror, straightened her blazer, and gave a small smile. Today was an important day. She had been invited for a business meeting at one of the biggest companies in the city. It wasn't a job interview. It was something bigger. She was supposed to meet with the board members to discuss a potential partnership. Angela had worked hard for years to reach this point. She built her own small consulting firm from the ground up, helping organizations become fairer and more diverse. Her work had gained attention, and now this large company wanted to meet her. She was proud but humble. Her grandmother's words always echoed in her mind. Let your grace speak before your voice does. Dressed neatly in a navy blue suit, Angela carried herself with quiet confidence. When she arrived at the tall glass building, she looked up and smiled. The company logo shone above the entrance. She whispered to herself, "This is it." She walked in, holding her small leather bag, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. Inside, the reception area looked grand, shiny floors, modern furniture, and people rushing around in suits. Angela walked up to the front desk and greeted the receptionist kindly. "Good morning," she said. "I have a meeting scheduled with Mr. Richard Collins at 10. The receptionist nodded politely, took her name, and called upstairs. A moment later, the receptionist looked up with a quick smile and said, "Please have a seat. Mr. Collins will be with you shortly." Angela thanked her and sat down in the waiting area. She took out her phone and checked the time, 9:55 a.m. Everything seemed on schedule. She opened a file folder and went over some notes. She wasn't nervous. She knew her worth and believed that professionalism and patience always left the best impression. 15 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. Angela looked around the room, noticing that other visitors were being greeted and escorted inside. A few even arrived after her and went in before her. Still, she didn't complain. She simply sat back and waited. The receptionist gave her a quick glance, then looked away awkwardly. Angela smiled politely to ease the tension. "It's all right," she said gently. "I understand." Upstairs, behind a glass wall, the manager, Richard Collins, was talking with a colleague. He noticed Angela sitting downstairs but didn't pay much attention. He assumed she was there for a lower-level position, maybe an applicant or a vendor. He didn't bother to ask. "She can wait," he said dismissively when the receptionist called again to check. Hours continued to pass. The lobby grew quieter as the morning rush slowed. Angela checked her watch. It was almost noon. Her meeting was supposed to start 2 hours ago. Her back ached slightly from sitting too long, but she stayed calm. She had faced tougher moments in life. A young intern passing by noticed her and asked softly, "Ma'am, have you been helped?" Angela smiled. "Not yet, dear. I'm just waiting for Mr. Collins." The intern looked surprised. "You've been here since morning?" Angela nodded calmly. "Yes, but patience is my strength." Her calmness drew quiet respect from the people who passed by. They could sense her dignity. Even though she was being ignored, she never once raised her voice or looked angry. She simply waited, graceful, composed, and confident. Inside his office, Richard laughed with another manager, completely unaware of the impression he was leaving. "These people show up unannounced sometimes," he said casually. "I'll see her when I'm free." He didn't know who Angela really was. Outside, Angela took a sip of water from the small dispenser near the waiting area. She looked at her reflection in the glass door. Her eyes were tired, but her spirit wasn't broken. She thought about all the times she had to prove herself, at college, at work, even in simple places like this. Yet every time she chose to rise above disrespect. Finally, after nearly 3 hours, she decided to stand up and stretch. She walked to the window and watched the busy street outside. People came and went, rushing to meetings, chasing time. But Angela wasn't in a rush. She knew that real success came to those who remained calm in uncomfortable moments. As she stood there, the receptionist looked at her again, guilt in her eyes. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry," she said quietly. "Mr. Collins said he's still in another meeting. It shouldn't be long." Angela gave her a kind smile. "It's okay, dear. I understand how these things work. I'll wait a little longer." But deep down she knew something wasn't right. She could feel the unspoken assumption in the way people looked at her. The judgment, the underestimation. They didn't see a professional woman with experience and intelligence. They only saw what they wanted to see. Still, Angela refused to let their behavior change her grace. She sat back down, opened her folder again, and began reviewing her notes as if everything was perfectly fine. The calmness in her face made her seem almost royal, as if she belonged there more than anyone else. She didn't know it yet, but soon, the same people who ignored her would be standing up to greet her with respect. In just a little while, the board members she came to meet would walk through those doors, and the look on Richard Collins's face would change everything. For now, Angela waited quietly, unaware that her patience was about to become her most powerful lesson. The big office clock ticked slowly as the morning faded into early afternoon. Angela was still sitting in the same chair, her hands resting neatly on her lap. She had been waiting for almost 3 hours now. The receptionist had stopped making eye contact, pretending to type something every time Angela glanced her way. Inside the manager's office, Richard Collins leaned back in his leather chair, sipping his coffee while scrolling through emails. He was a tall man in his 40s, always proud of his position and the power it gave him. To him, status mattered more than manners. When his assistant walked in to remind him about his 10 a.m. appointment, Richard frowned slightly. "Oh, that woman in the lobby?" he said casually. "Yeah, I saw her. She doesn't look like someone important. Maybe she's in the wrong place." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, she said her name is Angela Davis. I think she's here about the new consulting project." Richard shrugged, uninterested. Maybe, but she should have contacted me through the board. Tell her I'll call her when I'm free." He said it as if her time didn't matter at all. His tone wasn't openly rude, just careless, the kind of quiet disrespect that cuts deeper than harsh words. Meanwhile, downstairs, Angela kept her calm smile. She noticed the way people walked past her. Quick glances, soft whispers, the kind of looks that say, "What is she doing here?" But she stayed peaceful. She knew who she was. She didn't need to prove it. Every once in a while, new visitors entered. Some wore fancy suits and expensive watches. The receptionist would immediately stand up, greet them warmly, and offer them coffee. But when Angela asked politely if there was any update on her meeting, she received only short replies like, "Just a few more minutes, ma'am." Those few minutes had now become hours. At one point, a younger manager walked through the lobby holding some documents. He glanced at Angela and then leaned close to the receptionist, whispering something that made her chuckle nervously. Angela heard her name mentioned and understood more than she let on. She didn't react. Instead, she pulled out her notebook and began jotting down ideas for her presentation. Notes about leadership, fairness, and professional ethics. The irony made her smile. She was writing about respect in the workplace while being quietly disrespected in one. The cleaning lady, an older woman named Rosa, noticed Angela sitting there. During her break, she walked up and offered her a small bottle of water. "You've been waiting long, miss," Rosa said softly. "These people don't always see what's in front of them." Angela smiled kindly. "Thank you. Sometimes patience says more than anger ever could." Rosa nodded. "You have a good heart. Don't let them take that from you." Upstairs, Richard finally finished his coffee and leaned against the glass wall looking down at the lobby. He could see Angela sitting quietly. Something about her posture, calm, strong, and confident, made him pause for a second. But his pride quickly returned. "Strange woman," he muttered. "Who waits this long without complaining?" He didn't realize that his words revealed more about him than about her. A few other employees had started noticing too. They whispered among themselves, wondering why no one was attending to the lady downstairs. "She looks important," one of them said. "Didn't she come in a nice car?" another asked. Still, no one dared to interfere, not when the manager himself was ignoring her. Angela checked her watch again. It was now past 1 o'clock. She sighed softly but stayed composed. She thought about her father, who used to say, "Dignity is not in how others treat you. It's in how you respond." She whispered those words to herself like a prayer. As the lunch hour began, most of the office grew quieter. People went out for meals, laughter echoing down the hallway. The receptionist finally stood up and walked toward Angela with an awkward smile. "Ma'am, Mr. Collins is still finishing some work. He asked if you could wait a little longer." Angela smiled gently. "Of course," she said. "I've already waited this long. A little more won't hurt." Her kindness made the receptionist's heart ache. She nodded silently and walked away, feeling ashamed though she wasn't the one to blame. By now, Richard's arrogance had turned into complete indifference. He didn't realize that his behavior was being quietly observed by more people than he thought. Even the security guard shook his head in disappointment, and still Angela waited. No anger, no loud words, no complaints, just silent grace. She opened her notebook again and continued writing, her pen gliding smoothly over the pages. If someone had looked closely, they would have seen what she was writing. Leadership is not power over people, it's respect for people. Her words, written in that moment of injustice, would later become the heart of her presentation, the one that would change everything. As the hours passed, a strange energy filled the office, like something important was about to happen. No one could explain it, but everyone could feel it. The calm before a storm, the silence before truth arrives. Angela didn't know it yet, but her quiet patience was about to shake the very walls of that office. The man who thought she didn't matter was soon going to learn who she truly was, and his regret would come faster than he ever imagined. For now, she simply waited, calm, graceful, and ready for destiny to unfold. The soft hum of the air conditioner filled the quiet lobby. The morning rush was long over, and the sunlight streaming through the glass windows had turned into a warm golden glow. Angela was still there, sitting on the same couch, her posture calm but her eyes a little tired. She glanced at her wristwatch. It was now nearly 3 in the afternoon. The meeting that was supposed to start at 10 had turned into a silent waiting game. She closed her notebook gently and took a deep breath. There was no anger in her, only a deep understanding that patience often reveals more about others than about oneself. Every sound in the room seemed louder now. The ticking clock, the clicking heels of employees passing by, the occasional ring of the phone at the reception desk. Each minute stretched longer than the last. The receptionist, who had been avoiding her eyes earlier, now looked genuinely guilty. She had seen how long Angela had waited. Every now and then she glanced over, wanting to apologize but not knowing how. Finally, she walked over with a small, nervous smile. "Ma'am," she said softly, "would you like some water? Or maybe a cup of coffee?" Angela looked up with a kind smile. "That would be lovely, thank you," she said. Her voice was calm, warm. Not the voice of someone bitter, but someone strong enough to stay gentle. When the receptionist brought her the coffee, Angela thanked her sincerely. The young woman hesitated for a second before whispering, "I don't understand why they're making you wait. It's not right." Angela smiled again. Sometimes life tests people without warning. It shows who they are when no one's watching. Her words struck something in the receptionist's heart. She nodded silently and went back to her desk. But her eyes stayed on Angela from time to time, admiration slowly replacing discomfort. Meanwhile, upstairs Richard Collins was finishing another meeting, laughing with 2 colleagues. He had completely forgotten about the woman downstairs. To him, she wasn't a priority, just another name on a list he didn't care to check. He had no idea that the company's board of directors were on their way to the same building, expecting to meet the very woman he was ignoring. Back in the lobby, the hours crawled by. The afternoon sun began to fade and shadows grew longer. A few employees returning from lunch noticed Angela still sitting in the same spot. One of them whispered, "Is she still here?" "Yes," the receptionist said quietly. "She's been waiting since morning." A young intern nearby who had noticed Angela earlier finally gathered the courage to walk up to her. "Ma'am," he said politely, "are you sure you don't want to come back another day?" Angela smiled faintly. "Thank you, but no. I was invited here today and I'll wait until I'm received." The intern looked at her. There was something about her calmness that felt powerful. She didn't act desperate or impatient. She carried herself like someone who belonged exactly where she was. At that moment, an older employee passing by stopped to observe the scene. He recognized Angela's name from an email sent earlier by the company's CEO. His eyes widened slightly. He realized who she was. But before he could say anything, Richard walked by briskly, giving Angela only a brief glance as if she were invisible. Angela watched him for a second, then looked away. She didn't need to say anything. The silence said it all. She leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment. In her mind, she thought about her past. All the times people had underestimated her because of her color, her gender, or her quietness. But every time she had risen above it, not with anger, but with grace. She remembered something her mother used to say. When people look down on you, don't bow lower, stand taller in silence, and that's exactly what she did. The clock ticked toward 4. The lobby was almost empty now. Angela's phone buzzed softly, a reminder of her appointment. She looked at the screen and smiled bitterly. Still waiting. But then something began to change. The sound of polished shoes echoed from the hallway, followed by low voices. A group of people in expensive suits walked through the door, confident, professional, and clearly important. The receptionist immediately stood up, her nervousness replaced by professionalism. Angela looked up. Her patience hadn't gone unnoticed after all. The board members had arrived. They walked straight past Richard's assistant and into the lobby, scanning the room. One of the older men, Mr. Henderson, spotted Angela and smiled broadly. "Angela Davis!" he exclaimed. "It's so good to see you." The entire room froze. The receptionist's jaw dropped. Richard, standing nearby, stopped mid-sentence. Angela stood up gracefully, shaking hands with the board member as if the long wait had never happened. Her smile was calm but powerful, the kind that carried both dignity and quiet victory. In that single moment, the balance of power in the room shifted. Everyone who had ignored her now realized who she truly was, and the man who had made her wait for hours was about to face the consequences of his own arrogance. As the board members surrounded Angela, greeting her warmly and thanking her for coming, Richard's face turned pale. He finally understood his mistake, and the regret that was coming would be heavier than he could handle. But for Angela, there was no need for revenge, no bitterness. She simply looked around the lobby, smiled politely, and said, "Shall we begin our meeting?" Her patience had spoken louder than any argument ever could. The air in the lobby suddenly shifted, like a quiet storm before thunder. The heavy glass doors swung open, and a group of well-dressed individuals walked in with confidence. Their presence alone made everyone stand a little straighter. The receptionist instantly recognized them. They were the board members. Angela slowly stood up, her movements calm and graceful. She had been waiting for nearly 6 hours, but the way she carried herself, you'd think she had just arrived. Her navy blue suit still looked crisp, her face composed, her spirit unshaken. The board members exchanged greetings among themselves until one of them, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair, looked directly at Angela. His face lit up with warmth and respect. "Angela Davis," he said with a big smile. "We're so glad you could make it. We've been looking forward to meeting you in person." The lobby went silent. Every eye turned toward her. The receptionist froze, holding her breath. The same woman who had been sitting there quietly for hours, the one they all thought was a random visitor, was now being addressed by name by the company's most powerful people. Angela smiled, extending her hand politely. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you all," she said. Her voice was calm but carried weight, the kind of voice that demanded respect without ever asking for it. The board members shook her hand warmly, one after another. One of them, a woman in a gray suit, said softly, "We hope you weren't waiting long." Angela gave a polite smile. "Oh, not at all," she replied, her tone gentle but knowing. The receptionist lowered her head, realizing the quiet meaning behind those words. Upstairs, Richard Collins was laughing with another manager, unaware of the scene unfolding below. But within moments, his office phone buzzed urgently. It was the receptionist. Her voice trembled slightly. "Sir, the board members have arrived, and the woman who's been waiting all day, when she's with them." Richard frowned. "What, are you sure?" "Yes, sir. They're calling her Ms. Davis. They seem to know her very well." For the first time that day, Richard felt a chill run through him. He stood up quickly, straightening his tie. His colleague looked at him curiously. "What's wrong?" Richard didn't answer. He was already heading for the door, his heart pounding. When he stepped into the elevator, his reflection stared back at him, confident as always. But now there was something else in his eyes. Panic. As the elevator doors opened to the lobby, he saw them. The board members gathered around Angela like she was the most important person in the room. And maybe she was. One of the board members, Mr. Henderson, spotted him and called out cheerfully, "Ah, Richard. There you are. Come join us. I believe you've already met Ms. Davis? Richard froze. He swallowed hard before replying, Yes. Yes, of course, but his voice wavered. Angela turned to face him. Their eyes met for the first time that day, and in that silent moment every ounce of arrogance he had shown earlier came crashing down. Her calm gaze said everything. You saw me, but you didn't see me. Mr. Henderson continued proudly. Ms. Davis will be working with us as our new diversity and inclusion consultant. The CEO personally invited her to help strengthen our corporate values and leadership culture. The words hit Richard like thunder. Diversity and inclusion, the very principles he had failed to live by that morning. The other employees watched from their desks, whispering among themselves. The story was spreading fast. Everyone knew what had happened. The manager who made a woman wait for hours had ignored someone far above his rank. Angela, however, didn't show any trace of pride or revenge. She was still composed, still kind. She turned to Richard with a faint smile and said, Mr. Collins, I look forward to working with you. Her words were polite, but the weight of them was heavy. Richard forced a smile, his face red with embarrassment. Of course, he said weakly. Welcome aboard. The board members invited Angela upstairs for the official meeting. As they walked toward the elevator together, the receptionist caught Angela's eye and mouthed, I'm sorry. Angela gave her a soft smile in return. When the elevator doors closed behind her, the silence in the lobby was thick. Everyone knew this day would be remembered. Upstairs, as the doors opened again, Angela stepped out alongside the board members. The once proud manager now followed behind, quieter than ever. She could feel the energy around her shift. The same people who ignored her before were now watching her with admiration and guilt. As they entered the meeting room, Mr. Henderson began introducing her formally to the rest of the board. Ms. Davis has been instrumental in transforming several major companies with her programs on fairness, leadership, and equality. We're honored to have her on board. Richard sat down quietly, feeling smaller than ever. The irony was painful. He had failed the very test that Angela was here to teach. Angela began her presentation, her voice steady and full of conviction. True leadership, she said, is not about authority or titles. It's about how you treat others when you believe they have nothing to offer you. Richard lowered his eyes. The truth in her words burned deeper than any scolding could. And as the presentation continued, everyone in that room, and especially Richard, began to realize something powerful. Respect isn't given because of rank, wealth, or power. It's earned through kindness, humility, and humanity. The meeting room was silent except for the soft hum of the projector. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, painting golden lines across the polished table. Everyone sat still, focused on Angela as she spoke. Her tone was calm, measured, and confident. But behind every word, there was quiet power. We often talk about leadership, she began, looking around the room. But leadership isn't just about making decisions or managing people. It's about the way you make others feel when they walk into your space. The board members nodded thoughtfully. Some took notes. But one person couldn't bring himself to look up. Richard Collins. He sat at the far end of the table, his pen motionless. His thoughts loud. Every word Angela said felt like it was directed straight at him. Though she never once looked his way, she continued. A company's culture is not built by the speeches of its leaders, but by their actions, especially when no one important is watching. Richard's chest tightened. His face flushed with shame. He could still see the image of Angela sitting in the lobby for hours, waiting quietly while he ignored her. Now, here she was, standing in front of the most powerful people in the company, commanding the room with grace and wisdom. He looked down at his notepad, but all he saw were her words echoing in his mind. Leadership is respect for people. For the first time in a long time, Richard didn't feel like a manager. He felt small, painfully small. The CEO, who had joined the meeting remotely, smiled through the screen. Ms. Davis, he said, this is exactly why we wanted you here. We need someone who can remind us of what truly matters and not just profit but people. Angela nodded respectfully. Thank you, sir. It's my honor to be part of this mission. She then paused and looked around the table. You see, I believe that respect isn't something that should be taught as a policy. It should live in the heart of every employee from the top to the bottom. Because the moment we forget to see people as equals, we lose what makes us human. The room went silent again. Not out of boredom, but reflection. Every person there could feel the truth in her words. Richard wanted to disappear. He wished he could go back to that morning, shake his own shoulders and tell himself to see her, to recognize the dignity that had been right in front of him. But it was too late. Angela glanced in his direction for the first time. Her eyes were gentle, not angry. There was no revenge in her expression, only quiet disappointment. That made it worse. The meeting continued, filled with discussions and ideas, but Richard barely heard any of it. His mind kept replaying the moments from earlier, his dismissive tone, his arrogant shrug, the way he had laughed when he thought she was just a nobody. He had built his entire career on confidence, but now that same confidence felt like a lie. When the meeting ended, everyone stood up to shake hands with Angela. The board members thanked her sincerely, impressed by her presentation and character. She spoke kindly to each of them, her humility shining brighter than her success. As people began to leave, Richard stayed behind. His palms were sweaty, his throat dry. He knew he had to speak to her, not as a manager, not even as an equal, but as a man who had finally seen himself clearly. "Ms. Davis," he said quietly, walking up to her as she packed her documents. "May I have a moment?" Angela turned, her calm eyes meeting his. "Of course," he hesitated before speaking. "I owe you an apology," he said softly. "This morning, I didn't treat you the way I should have. I made assumptions, wrong ones, and I'm deeply ashamed of that." Angela didn't say anything right away. She just watched him, not with anger, but with understanding. After a moment, she said, "Mr. Collins, acknowledgement is the first step toward change. What matters now is what you do next." Her words were simple, but they hit him harder than any lecture ever could. He nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll do better, and not because I have to, but because I finally understand why I should." Angela smiled gently. "That's a good start." They stood there in silence for a moment. For Richard, that silence was heavier than any noise, Yao. It was filled with regret, humility, and strange relief. As she turned to leave, she paused and said, "You know, Mr. Collins, when I was sitting in the lobby today, I almost left. But then I thought, maybe my patience could teach someone something. And I guess it did." Richard lowered his head, ashamed but grateful. "It did," he whispered. Angela nodded once and walked away, her heels echoing softly across the floor. Each step felt like a mark of dignity, a reminder of the lesson she had just taught without raising her voice. When she left the room, Richard stayed behind, alone with his thoughts. The office suddenly felt colder, emptier. He sat down slowly, looking at the empty chair she had occupied. For the first time, he realized that leadership wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing others. And in that quiet moment, he understood the true meaning of respect. The next morning, the office felt different, quieter, heavier, like the air itself was carrying a secret. People whispered in corners, voices soft but curious. The story of what had happened yesterday had spread through every floor before lunchtime. Everyone knew now. The woman who had waited all morning in the lobby wasn't some visitor or applicant. She was Angela Davis, the new board consultant, personally invited by the CEO to improve workplace ethics and inclusion. And the manager who had made her wait? That was Richard Collins. Richard entered the office that morning with a heavy heart. His usual confident stride was gone. Even his polished shoes sounded uncertain against the tiled floor. He greeted the receptionist quietly, the same young woman who had watched everything unfold the day before. She nodded politely but didn't smile. He couldn't blame her. When he reached his desk, he saw an email waiting for him, subject line, "Meeting with HR and board members at 11 a.m. His stomach twisted. He already knew what it was about. At 11 sharp, Richard walked into the conference room. The HR director, 2 senior board members, and Angela were already there. Her expression was calm, professional, not a trace of anger, not even pride. That somehow made it harder. The HR director began speaking first. "Mr. Collins," she said firmly but politely, "it has come to our attention that there was an incident yesterday involving Ms. Davis. Would you like to explain what happened?" Richard took a deep breath. For once, he didn't try to defend himself. "There's no excuse," he said quietly. "I misjudged her. I saw her waiting in the lobby and assumed she wasn't important. I treated her with less respect than I should have given anyone, board member or not. I'm ashamed of that." The room stayed silent. Angela finally spoke, her tone calm and sincere. "Mr. Collins, I appreciate your honesty. What matters most is whether you'll let this change how you lead others." He nodded slowly. "I will, I promise I will." The HR director looked at him thoughtfully. "This company values professionalism, empathy, and fairness. You've been with us for years, Richard, and your work has always been strong. But yesterday's behavior doesn't reflect our values. We're putting you on leadership probation for 3 months, and you'll attend the new ethical leadership training program Ms. Davis is developing." Richard lowered his head. "I understand it wasn't just punishment. It was accountability. And in a strange way, he felt grateful." After the meeting, as people went back to their offices, Angela stayed behind for a moment. She walked over to Richard and said softly, "I know it's not easy to face your mistakes, but this could be your beginning, not your end." Her words weren't just kind, and they were freeing. Richard nodded, his eyes heavy with regret and relief. "Thank you," he said quietly. Over the next few weeks, the office slowly began to change. Angela's influence could be felt everywhere. She organized workshops on workplace respect, inclusion, and communication. Her sessions weren't lectures. They were stories, real experiences that made people see the importance of kindness in leadership. Richard attended every one of them, sitting in the front row. He listened closely, sometimes taking notes, sometimes just absorbing her words. Each session reminded him of how blind he had been, how easily people in power could forget what humility meant. Employees noticed the change in him too. He no longer barked orders or dismissed ideas. He listened more, spoke less, and treated everyone, from the janitor to the interns, with genuine respect. One day, during a workshop break, the same receptionist who once avoided his eyes walked up to him. "You've really changed, sir," she said softly. Richard smiled faintly. "I'm trying," he replied. "Ms. Davis taught me something I should have known long ago. Leadership without empathy is just control." The receptionist smiled. "She's special, isn't she?" "She is," Richard agreed. "And she's exactly what this place needed." By the end of the 3rd month, the company felt brighter, not just in performance, but in spirit. Angela had become more than a consultant. She was a symbol of strength, grace, and quiet transformation. Her patience that one morning had turned into a lesson for everyone. Even those who hadn't witnessed the incident spoke of it as if it were an old company legend. The day the manager waited for his lesson. When her contract period neared its end, the CEO personally visited the office to thank her. "Ms. Davis," he said, shaking her hand, "you didn't just help us fix a problem, you changed our culture, and that's something no policy could ever do." Angela smiled warmly. "Change doesn't start with systems," she said. "It starts with people who are willing to see others clearly." Richard stood nearby, watching her with respect that came from the deepest part of him. When she turned to leave the office one last time, he walked up and said, "Ms. Davis, I'll never forget what you taught me." Angela smiled. "Then my job is done." She walked out of the building just as gracefully as she had entered it on that first day, except this time, every head turned toward her with admiration. The same lobby where she had once been ignored now stood still in silence, watching her leave like someone watching a quiet hero. And as the doors closed behind her, even Richard knew that some lessons don't need to be spoken twice, because respect, once learned the hard way, never leaves you. Months passed since that unforgettable day, the day a simple act of waiting turned into a lifelong lesson for an entire company. The office no longer felt the same. The air was lighter, the energy warmer, and people smiled more often. It was as if someone had quietly opened a window and let the sunlight back in. Angela Davis had long finished her consulting program, but her presence still lingered, not in the form of posters or policies, but in the way people spoke to one another, in how they listened before replying, and in how they greeted even the janitor with the same respect they gave the CEO. The receptionist, who used to rush through her mornings nervously, now carried herself with pride. She often told new employees, "You see that seat by the window? That's where Ms. Davis once waited. And that's where we all learned what patience really looks like." As for Richard Collins, the once proud manager who had made her wait, he had changed more than anyone. His loud voice had softened. His arrogance had melted into humility. People noticed how he treated others now, with genuine care and attention. He had learned that respect isn't about who stands in front of you, but how you choose to stand with them. Every morning, he made it a habit to walk through the lobby, greet the staff, and thank the receptionist for her work. Some people thought he was just trying to fix his image, but those who saw his eyes knew it wasn't for show. It was real. One Friday afternoon, a company-wide event was held to celebrate their improved workplace culture. The theme was humanity and leadership. Richard stood near the back of the room, quietly watching as the CEO took the stage. "We've grown," the CEO said proudly. "Not just in numbers, but in heart. And for that, we owe gratitude to someone who reminded us what real leadership means." Then he paused and smiled. "To Ms. Angela Davis, wherever she is, a thank you." The audience clapped warmly, some even standing. Richard's eyes grew misty. He didn't join in loudly. He just clapped softly, lost in thought. After the event, he returned to his office and sat by the window, looking out at the busy city below. The reflection of the skyline danced across his coffee cup. He thought about the day he first saw Angela sitting in that lobby, quiet, patient, waiting. He had once thought patience was weakness. Now he understood it was the highest form of strength. He opened his drawer and took out a small notebook. Inside, he had written down something from one of Angela's workshops. "The real measure of character is not how you treat those who can help you, but how you treat those you think cannot." He read it again and whispered, "I understand now." A few weeks later, the company received a handwritten letter. It was from Angela. The receptionist brought it to Richard's office. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside, the letter read, "Dear Mr. Collins, I hope this note finds you well. I wanted to thank you, not for what happened that day, but for what you chose to do after it. We all make mistakes. What defines us is whether we grow from them. You didn't just apologize. You transformed. And through that, you inspired others. Leadership isn't about perfection. It's about awareness, compassion, and humility. I'm proud of the leader you're becoming. Warm regards, Angela Davis." Richard folded the letter slowly, his eyes watering as he smiled. He placed it carefully inside a frame on his desk. From that day onward, every time a new employee joined the company, Richard would share the story, not to embarrass himself, but to remind others. "Never assume someone's worth by how they look, dress, or weight," he'd say, "because one day the person you underestimate might be the one teaching you how to lead." Years later, people still spoke of Angela Davis, the woman who changed a company without anger, without shouting, without revenge. Just patience, just dignity, just truth. Her story spread beyond the walls of that office. Other businesses invited her to speak. Schools shared her lessons with students, and countless people found courage in her calmness. And Richard, once a symbol of arrogance, became living proof that people can change when they are brave enough to face their own reflection. The company thrived, not just financially but morally. Every policy, every meeting, every interaction was shaped by one unspoken rule: respect first, always. In the end, Angela's legacy wasn't written in reports or company records. It was written in hearts, because one woman's patience turned humiliation into hope. Because one man's regret turned into redemption. And because sometimes the quietest person in the room teaches the loudest lesson.